I'm Sue O'Connell. Tonight on Greater Boston, local academics are fighting back against efforts to censor the way educators across the country can teach their students about structural racism, Black history, and gender and sexual orientation. I'm joined by a Harvard professor leading that charge. Then, a look at the allegations of withholding tips and abusing employees against famed Boston chef Barbara Lynch. There's been a lot of political ire directed at school curriculums in recent years, with conservative Republicans throwing around words like woke and indoctrination anytime children are exposed to stories about the LGBTQ community or lessons that accurately depict racism as an ongoing and systemic problem in America. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has put that ire into action, championing what's become known as the Don't Say Gay law, prohibiting teachers from talking to children about sexual orientation and gender identity. He's also taken aim at a new advanced placement African American studies course, which he blocked Florida high schools from teaching.
We have guidelines and standards in Florida. We want education, not indoctrination. If you fall on the side of indoctrination, we're going to decline.
After that, the College Board, which develops and oversees AP curricula across the country, started adjusting the course based on criticisms from DeSantis, sparking a backlash of its own, including from my next guest, who argues DeSantis' response underlines the very reason the United States needs an AP African American Studies course taught in schools. Khalil Gibran Muhammad, a professor of history, race, and public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, joins me now. He's just back from a teach-in he led at the university today, protesting changes to the course. Professor, welcome, and thank you for coming right from your action to here to spread the word. Let's go back a little bit. What was your reaction when the AP courses and the College Board, which is a nonprofit, by the way, decided they wanted to make some changes to these courses based on what Governor DeSantis was asking them to do?
Well, I felt like it was a bridge too far. I mean, I've been watching, just like many people, the passage of so-called anti-CRT laws or divisive concept laws that essentially establish that the point of education is that students should feel good rather than actually learning the truthful history of our country, which is both beautiful and ugly. And so when the College Board seemed initially to appease the Department of Education in Florida with essentially striking from the proposed African American Studies curriculum anything more or less that happened after 1965 as being political or divisive, or queer studies, as Governor DeSantis described as not being an educational subject area that students should learn, for me was a moment to actually get involved, to say enough is enough. We have to do something about this.
Has there been a moment in history where this has happened in this way before, understanding that, you and I have talked before. I shared with you that when I was in middle school in the 70s, I didn't learn about Ida B. Wells, but I had the opportunity to homeschool my kid in middle school, and that's when I learned about Ida B. Wells, by educating her through the curriculum that they provided, and that's great news that we're learning these things. But there's always been a battle about what kids get taught, but has it ever been like this?
So that's an interesting question. So on one hand, yes, there have been fights over what American children learn. Texas, for example, just over 10 years ago, changed a lot of its curriculum to remove social movement history and to put more what they call proper conservative history. And the effect of Texas's changes around 2010 also shaped textbooks, which for Texas, as a huge buyer of textbooks, to some degree indirectly affected the entire country. So we've had some version of these. There were national standards fights in the 1990s when Lynn Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, was the head of the leading this effort, and in her work she decided to strike again from the proposed changes then to proposed American history standards, that there be more Ronald Reagan and less Bob Moses as a local Boston hero and civil rights activist. What we are facing now, though, has never been about just the curriculum. This is about state legislation and laws that prohibit the mere mention, discussion of books are being pulled from libraries in schools. For example, Ruby Bridges is not being taught to students because white children might feel bad that white parents and activists tried to block her from integrating a New Orleans school. I think this is something that we've never seen at this level and has the impact of potentially segregating half the country in terms of what they learn about the American past.
So there are a number of businesses and institutions that are all mixed up into this, right? You've got the College Board, the nonprofit that makes these AP courses that kids can then take and maybe get credit for their colleges. You've got the textbook manufacturers, you've got the textbook writers and publishers, you have the educators. What are they saying about this, right? I imagine there are conversations where they feel the push and pull about Governor DeSantis and this move, but facts are facts. I mean, history's history. These things actually happen. They're on Wikipedia.
Well, that's true. I think, so we have to think about the marketplace for curriculum as a marketplace of money making. So the College Board generates about $1 billion in revenue from its various programs, which include AP courses that are adopted by thousands of high schools around the country, as well as the SAT test. So they want to make sure that whatever product they put in the world or in this country will be sold in all 50 states. Same is true with textbooks. And in a country where white supremacy and white nationalism are on the rise as a political matter, not just in the backwoods of our country where a few people are holdouts from a long time ago, but actually people are winning legislative office on the promise of denying the January 6th riot, for example, where a prominent Confederate flag was held up in the halls of the Capitol Rotunda, which had never happened even during the Civil War. So when you have a marketplace of ideas where those kinds of retrograde racist ideas are part of the political landscape of various states in this country, it also means that people like the College Board and textbook writers have to worry whether or not their products will be viable in those places. And that's certainly part of the problem right now.
The challenge I recognize too, which has always been a challenge, is parents often don't care about education, and many adults, don't care about education until their children are in the system, are in the schools. Yeah. And often they don't care afterwards when their kids get out of the schools because they're exhausted.
Unless they're paying high property taxes for somebody else's kid.
Exactly. But they're exhausted. Their kid has moved through. And the mis and disinformation, especially around critical race theory, I had a very spirited conversation with someone asking them if they knew what the word critical meant. If we just looked at what the word critical meant, that would really expand your definition of what putting critical in front of something means. What can educators do? What can reasonable thinking people do to try and help parents who are very busy and have a lot of things on their plate understand how dangerous this censorship is to their children and to America?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the same tool of engagement, which is talking to people who are not paying close attention, is the same tool that many people who self-identify on the right have done to scare them into thinking this is a terrible thing, this CRT, what is this? Why is my kid being exposed to this? But the same rules apply. People who believe that understanding the history of structural racism, the history of gender inequality, the history of attacks on sexuality, and the invisibility that people who experience these forms of identity across multiple axes, which is what intersectionality is, need our attention too. They need the focus of conversation. They need to be exposed to thoughtful conversations. They need to be organized in the same way that the right has very effectively organized people to go to school board meetings and say, no anti-CRT here. Or, as I saw colorfully, diversity means white genocide. I mean, it's remarkable to see the effectiveness of political mobilization in the opposite direction.
So you're a lot smarter than I am, and you are in this world. Can you explain to me how someone who teaches, a parent who educates their child around difficult conversations around religion, like the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, or the way that Easter is celebrated, what the meaning behind Easter is, can have such a hard time still teaching concepts of history, which are also difficult conversations, and at the same time accuse liberals and progressives of being snowflakes when it comes to progressives wanting to talk about the horrors of our history for everyone, not just one particular group. I mean, do you hear anybody giving you an argument of how they can square that off?
They can't. It can't be squared. Just like the idea of passing legislation to prohibit the exposure to ideas is done in the name and sloganeering of education, not indoctrination. I mean, that is the call sign of Florida Governor. Let's not teach children about how queer people experience the world, because that's not education, that's indoctrination, which is to say, let's close off learning and be exposed to the ways that people actually live and breathe in this society, and that legislation might actually cut short their lives or be subject to discrimination, is not exposing kids to certain ideas. It's just the reverse.
So how can an educator fight back against this? I can't imagine trying to explain why Harvey Milk has a Navy carrier ship named after him, or trying to explain a whole number of things in history without talking about someone's sexual orientation or mentioning it, or talking about the importance of their gender or their gender expression in history. Are teachers reacting to this in a "why are you making my job harder" sort of way?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you from firsthand experience, because I'm helping to lead a national movement called the Freedom to Learn movement, we have talked to the American Federation of Teachers Leadership, we've talked to the United Federation of Teachers Leadership, and the largest teachers union, the National Education Association. All of them are deeply committed to fighting against this and are using every tool that they have in their tool belt to support teachers who are severely at risk of being fired or censored, and will certainly threatened in the classroom if they should hit one of these tripwires. It's impossible to know exactly what you should do, and that's the culture of fear that is being created. The point is, do less than what you used to. That's the message that they're getting. And unfortunately, too many teachers will have to accept that bargain until we, the public, help them.
So you had an event today. What's the future? What's the plan?
The plan is to mobilize people in places like Massachusetts and other states where this is not happening, to support people in Mississippi, Alabama, Montana, and many other states. We have evidence that at least 16 states have passed anti-truth laws, anti-CRT, don't say gay, you name it, and 49 states at the local level or at the state level have attempted various anti-CRT measures. So a lot of us who may enjoy the comforts today of the freedom to learn may not tomorrow, but in the meantime, we need to travel to other places in support of organizing people to stand up. We've got a 2024 election, which isn't just about what happens in the White House, it's also about what happens in the state houses. And that is an opportunity for us to get ahead of this problem instead of waiting for the next news story of another governor somewhere else banning our ability to teach and learn.
We should not be relying on Wikipedia to tell us all the truth, right?
That's right.
I appreciate you coming in. I know you had a busy day, and I appreciate the work you're doing. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, when two former employees of famed Boston restaurateur Barbara Lynch filed a lawsuit in March claiming she withheld tips during the pandemic, it was just the tip of the iceberg. In the weeks since, a flood of allegations have poured in, with former employees detailing years of verbal, physical, and sexual harassment from Lynch. And while the lawsuit over the tip continues, with employees at all 7 of her restaurants arguing Lynch broke state wage laws in spring 2020, her employees are also looking to hold the acclaimed chef accountable for her behavior on the job. I'm joined now by one of those former employees, Hillary Yah, who worked as a server at Lynch's B&G Oysters in the South End from 2010 to 2021, along with her lawyer, Lou Sabin. And we did invite Barbara Lynch to join us today. She declined. Hillary, I want to start with you around this tip conversation and this lawsuit, because the restaurant business, as we're going to talk about, is a very complicated world when it comes to pay. It's almost like its own universe. What is the lawsuit alleging was happening?
Essentially, when we started working again, that we did not get our tips. In lieu of receiving our tips, they decided to pay us a certain amount of money, and then all of our tips were being taken by the restaurant group itself. So we ourselves were not receiving the tips that were being left for us.
In lieu, what's wrong with that?
Well, so basically, in the state of Massachusetts, there's very specific laws. And I think you addressed this earlier, talking about how sometimes the laws surrounding wage in Massachusetts, it can be arcane and difficult to understand. But the law is very clear on this sort of thing. The tips are the property of waitstaff employees. At the Barbara Lynch properties, they were being paid with paycheck protection plan funds. But it seems like when you looked at their pay stubs, the tips weren't going to the employees. And the law makes it very clear. Her team has addressed this sort of thing, but they still haven't been able to say that the tips went to the employees. So that's something we're looking into. We're making sure we look into where those tips went. And the purpose of this lawsuit is to make sure all those tips go to the waitstaff employees.
We have a statement from Barbara Lynch on the response to the lawsuit contesting the allegations against her. They say every employee was paid 100% of their prior year earnings, and the plaintiffs in that suit earned over $40 per hour. In addition, throughout the shutdown, the company maintained continuous benefits and did not collect any premiums from employees. Is that part true?
That part is true, but once again, what we kind of have to look at is there's a reason why they have these laws in place. And the reason why they have these laws in place is because if you allow the tips to go through the management and they are able to decide what to do with them, technically that money isn't yours, and that's why the laws are in place. So once again, you can justify on your side of things how it is that you wanted things to be spent, but it does not change the fact that you took our tips. So those were spent in different ways than we could have personally spent them, having them in our own bank account.
Was there any discussion about this before the lawsuit was filed?
Well, at that point in time, it was a very chaotic and scary point, and honestly, it did not look like the restaurant industry was going to make it. In regards of perspective, I think everyone was grateful to see that they might have an opportunity on the horizon. So yes, it was discussed, but in general, what we were agreeing to was a scenario that was largely unprecedented. I mean, honestly, everybody was really concerned about survival at that point in time and not necessarily whether or not people were doing things on the up and up, because we did trust them. We did trust people, and also the people that take care of us to do the right thing.
At what point did you think this isn't kosher, this isn't going the way we think it should be?
I never thought it was something that was legal. I am pretty familiar with what the tip law is, but because it was such an unprecedented point in time and PPP was its own animal that was morphing, it was questionable, and you just assumed that people who had bookkeepers and CPAs and human resources and legal teams would know best.
So, Lou, to that point, I've been in any number of restaurants. I tried to support the restaurants as best I could during the pandemic with takeout, and then I keep now every time I get a check, I look at the check. Like I have been a very lazy check looker at her. Like, oh, looks like that's how much it costs, And I'm seeing these fees for things, and then some Facebook posts will come up saying this restaurant or this cafe is double dipping or double charging. Is this a message to everyone who's in this business that it's a good time to take a look at what your policies are and make sure that they are legal and you're adhering to state law, and also listening to if your employees are complaining about what's happening?
I think that's a great way to put it, because what this suit is trying to achieve basically is making sure that all of the employees at these 7 restaurants get the tips to which they're entitled, and I think Hillary touched on this earlier. It was a time where the restaurant industry, there was a lot of people were saying that the restaurant industry was not even going to survive at all. And at restaurants like Barbara Lynch's restaurants, you have high-end clients. High-end restaurants bring high-end clients. So a lot of them would leave very generous tips because they saw people like Hillary being in there putting themselves in harm's way to continue to serve them. So that's one half of it, is we're looking to make sure that those tips get to employees. The other half of it is something I talked about earlier, and it can be really difficult to understand the intricacies of wage law. And a lot of places don't have the money to have a huge legal department. So something like this can really put people on notice. Hey, maybe I need to take a look at my payroll policies. Hey, maybe I need to take a look at where my tips are going. Maybe I need to take a look at everything. And I think that there's a lot of restaurant owners, managers who are trying to do the right thing. And if this causes just a couple of them to take a look at their policies, I think that's great too. So it's not really just a punitive thing, but we're hoping it's an educational thing. We can fire a shot across a couple people's mouths. And, you know, if you've got questions, ask. You know, and if you're not certain what the law is, there's people out there who can answer those questions for you.
Hillary, I want to move to the more disturbing in a certain way. This is sort of a business problem, and the hostile work environment is a different entity. And I want to thank you for coming in and talk about it. I'm sure it's more difficult than talking about tip issues. There's, of course, a lot of allegations that have been both in the Boston Globe and in the New York Times, stories breaking simultaneously, with many employees coming forward, sharing stories of how they felt they experienced a hostile work environment. What do you feel comfortable sharing with us about that environment and how you felt about it?
Personally, I have to say that I'm really impressed with the number of people who are coming forward. In general, this is not a personal vendetta in any way, shape, or form, but I did feel very strongly that other people's voices are heard in regards to the experience that they had in their workplaces. I personally was relatively lucky. I think it had been said that a lot of people thought of Barbara as kind of an absentee owner. And in truth, I worked at B&G for 11 years, and it was few and far between the number of times that we have ever interacted, to the extent that I'm pretty sure that she didn't know my name. But I cannot, my personal experience is with this venue in particular, and there's so many other people that have stories to tell that I do think it's really important, and I'm really proud that they've come forward and continue to come forward, because there is a lot to be learned from what they're saying.
I have a statement from Barbara Lynch regarding the allegations of hostile work environment. The fantastical accusation surfacing now that employees working side by side with me on the same shifts did not seem designed to take me down and lump me in with peers accused of behavior that is absolutely criminal. I expressly reject the various false accusations lodged against me that I have behaved inappropriately with employees or crossed professional guideposts that are important to me. What's your response to that?
I never worked in that capacity or manner, so I do think that there are other people who worked that much more closely, and in particular people in kitchen staff that have a lot more to say about that. I think that it's normal to defend yourself. I think that there's always room for improvement, and I think that this is a very good opportunity to hear what people have to say about improving that workplace.
Lou, this industry, the restaurant business, has been in a bubble. You know, I was joking earlier with some colleagues. I worked in the nightclub business for a short period of time.
Yeah.
The restaurant business is far worse than the nightclub business. It's always been surprising to me when you've got a different kind of element, and you would think. But it seems like the nightclub business, at least, they were a little bit more fun, you know. Is this legal minefield for so many, not particularly this case, but the stories that you hear of people working in restaurants, in the kitchen, the way we romanticize it in many movies and television shows, it's just food. It is a business, but it's just food. Is it time for restaurants to really take a self-check here and realize that they are a place of business and not just some creative studio where someone is working alone and can have all the tantrums that they want?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And just to quickly respond to her statement there, you know, if she would like to respond to any of the specific allegations that people made, you know, we certainly welcome that. I don't represent a lot of those people that she spoke about. I represent Hillary and a few others, but we just want to stand up for those people's continued ability to speak about these sort of things. And yeah, I mean, I come from the restaurant industry. I worked in restaurants for 17 years. You know, I've been in the trenches. I know what it's like. That's why I personally feel such a deep connection with restaurant people. And I know what it's like. And forever, for years, there was a phrase that we would just use, oh, it's just the industry. You know, and that was a cover phrase for sexual impropriety. wage violations, racial discrimination, over dependency on chemicals. And you're correct, it was a romanticized thing. Oh, we live by a different set of rules. And those people over there, they wouldn't understand how we live. And because of that, the abuses were heaped upon and people just accepted it. But I think with people continuing to tell their stories, and once again, if she has responses to those specific allegations, more than willing to hear them. But we fully support people continuing to tell those stories so people might take a look. And when you have incidents that happen, like the one described at Montagne, when there's incidents where things are said and things are done, where a lot of people feel really, really deep hurt because they experienced loss of loved ones who meant so much to them, who were in mentorship positions. And the kind of response that they received, where they feel so much hurt, that's when people start asking questions.
That you're referring, of course, to the death of one of the employees and her response that is alleged that she had at the restaurant.
Exactly, and not only just one, it was two. Two in 2 months, which sent shockwaves through the restaurant industry. And when someone responds in the way that Ms. Lynch did, sometimes that can hurt a lot of people's feelings, and people are willing to accept, oh, maybe they're shaving my hours. Maybe my tips aren't going to the right place. But when people feel really hurt, that's when they start asking questions. And that's when, more importantly, they start seeking answers to those questions. And those are the kind of questions that we're asking with this particular lawsuit. Where did the tips go? And like we said, our goal is to make sure that all those tips go to the right place, which is the waitstaff employees.
You're still in the business?
I am.
Still love the business?
I always love the business.
We'll always love it.
Still optimistic about the business?
Absolutely. I'm never giving up. It's a really big part of my soul.
I thank you both. Hillary, Lou, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your stories with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks
We
for
appreciate
having
it.
us.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Sue O'Connell. Thanks for watching. Good night.